level. Okay, so the first question is, how much influence do interviews at schools such as Harvard and Princeton have on admissions decisions? Of course, I have a lot to say about this because I used to be a Harvard interviewer. I would say at the end of the day, an interview can be one of the more important aspects, just because if you're applying for these schools, technically the most important elements are going to be things like your grades, the rigor of your classes, and of course test scores. But at some level, the serious candidates to these schools are going to have like nearly perfect in those categories. So there's not going to be much to distinguish them, right? So that's why things like extracurricular activities, your recommendation letters, obviously your essays, and of course the interview then become much more important components once you figure out that a lot of the students will have very, very similar top shelf credentials in terms of numbers. Okay, so at the end of the day, I would probably say that a good interview will probably have a similar impact to a solid recommendation letter. That's pretty much for those top schools what you're looking at in terms of like doing really well for your interview. Now, granted, you need to take a look for other schools. It'll vary dramatically. I think so for Cornell, a lot of their interviews tend to be purely informational. The UCs don't even do interviews, so it'll vary tremendously, right? I think for MIT, it's very, very important, even more so than the Ivies. So do your research, look at the school. There's something called a common data set where you can look up exactly how big of a factor each component is. So it'll tell you how big of a component the interview would be for those schools. Next is, I'm interested in CS, but my math pathway restricts me from advancing my math class at school due to my course selection mistake at the beginning of high school. So I guess so instead of AP Calculus in 11th grade, I have to wait until 12th grade. Would that significantly decrease my chances to be admitted? No, right? So of course, it'd look better if you can take more advanced classes like multivariable calculus by 12th grade, but it's by no means something that they should punish you for that, right? So it's more important, of course, that you do well in the existing classes that you had access to, because frankly, there are high schools, for instance, or there's school districts where like the earliest class you can actually get to is maybe like geometry freshman year, right? So they don't want to penalize people based on things that they really had not too much control over, right? So my advice to you is just do the best you can. It's probably going to have a fairly minimal, if any, sort of impact on your application. So just do the best you can for AP Calculus, because don't forget, like 12th grade first semester will still be evaluated. They'll still look at it, okay? Next is the caliber of students one interacts with is important to the college experience. Wow, we have a preface kind of, contextualization part of that. As a USC trustee or presidential scholar, would being in the USC honors program be intellectually gratifying as Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, and top liberal arts colleges? Well, I think it's very important. I mean, I know from firsthand experience, I was part of the thematic option honors program when I was an undergrad at USC. And, I did feel like the caliber of classes for that program are very, very high level. You're going to be there with some very bright people, obviously, right? If they got like trustee scholarships, like half or full tuition scholarships, these are really bright people. Now, having said that, though, it's not going to be like that's all your classes, right? So the honors program at USC simply replaces your general education requirements. So you're going to have that for maybe one class per semester, right? So that wouldn't completely, I would say, replace the total package education that you would get at a top level Ivy or even a top level liberal arts college, okay? To be fair, right? I would say that you would still get a much more engaging overall experience at one of those top schools. However, it's not that far apart anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like if you looked at the numbers recently, I think USC is going to shock some people. They had a 5.9% early action acceptance rate, and they're projected to have something like a 7% overall acceptance rate this year, right? So USC is really climbing the charts in terms of how rigorous it's going to be overall. So over time, you're going to get much more selective students going there. So, I mean, if not already now, do you know what I mean? I'm pretty sure there's already a marked difference in terms of the caliber of students that are getting into USC now than when I went as an undergrad, to be honest, right? So yeah, you're definitely going to get a top-notch education through their honors program, but at the end of the day, you're still going to probably get a much better overall quality at those schools because it'll encompass a broader range of classes. Okay. Next is, my child is interested in some of the stereotypical Asian activities such as piano, chess, or math. Should I encourage him to do these? I would say if they have some real talent in it, don't dissuade them from it. The only thing I caution some parents and students is that you do want to have other complementary activities to make their profile a little bit more distinct or well-rounded. However, one or two unique activities that would complement those things, because I think it's it would do them a disservice to say don't do piano if they're especially talented at it, or chess or math for that matter. So if they're really good at it, go for it, right? Do the best you can, but make sure that you do have like some one or two complementary activities that are a little bit less common or more distinct, okay? Next, is taking community college classes a wise idea for a rising sophomore? Is the level of class too difficult? That's going to vary tremendously based on the student himself or herself, right? So we've had some rising sophomores be able to handle college level classes. It'll also probably depend on the community college, and it'll also depend on what type of class, right? So a high level CS class or math class might be more difficult, whereas if you took maybe like, I don't know, like sociology, for instance, that might be a little bit easier depending on the student. Okay. Next is, can I list the Coursera courses related to my major on the application? Sure. If there's space, I would put it in like additional info. I wouldn't make it a big deal because there's not even a place for like the Common App for you to put that down in terms of college courses, right? So if you had room, you wanted to put down additional information, I think it's worthwhile, right? The UCs also have a section called courses other than A through G, right? So if you wanted to put one or two just to show you have, interest in doing that, I think it's laudable. That shows that you're actually taking the extra initiative, but it's not going to be at the level of, let's say, for example, if you took a college class outside of your curriculum for college credits, okay? Next is, between starting a club in school and starting a club in a nonprofit, which one is better? I heard the UCs prefer to see your involvement in school clubs over the ones outside of school. I mean, to some minimal degree, sure. Yeah. I mean, colleges would want to see that you're involved in school, but it's not like they look down on activities you did outside of school. I think it's more of an issue of like, if you didn't do any school clubs whatsoever, that would be a much more glaring omission, right? Because these colleges, the rationale here is that colleges want to see that you're going to be very involved in the school community. So if everything you do is outside of school, then that's not going to be a good look. Okay, so I would say if you are looking for things that your school can't offer, then absolutely doing clubs at a nonprofit like we do in Compassionate Scholars would be a nice way to sort of round out your overall profile. The thing with outside programs, for instance, is that you may have greater latitude. You may not necessarily have opportunities for leadership within your school clubs, or there might be paperwork or bureaucracy, or your club could have been rejected. There are a number of reasons why people will look outside to complement their existing school clubs. But like I said, a balance of both would be ideal. Next is, my child really loves playing chess. What kind of extracurricular activities can you recommend? Well, I mean, chess itself should be an extracurricular activity. If they want to do tournaments, if they want to do competitions, encourage them to do it. If you wanted to look for activities that maybe have a similar skill set in a way, I mean, there are a lot of other things that they can do, right? I would say speech and debate, being very strategically oriented and planning ahead and trying to sort of outguess your opponent, would have a similar kind of, I guess, satisfaction, if you will, right? There's a competitive element to it that I think might be good for a student if they're interested in chess. That's just one example. I'm pretty sure a number of other activities, I mean, certain sports, for instance, tend to be very strategic and competitive as well. But if they're not good at athletic stuff, then I guess maybe debate would be a good alternative. Next is, if a student took Spanish 3 at sophomore year, and does the student have to take AP Spanish in junior year, or do they need to? I mean, of course, colleges prefer that you take the foreign language that you started to the highest level possible. However, if you're worried that you may not necessarily get grade in AP, then that might be a reason. I mean, I think for most colleges, Spanish 3 should probably suffice as far as being at the intermediate level. But I mean, if you can, I would highly recommend taking AP Spanish, just because not only does it look good in its own right, but it also is one more weighted class that you would have on your schedule. Next is, would you recommend doing self-study of AP for a chance to, hold on, even though the classes are being offered at the high school, taking those AP, no, that's not a good idea, right? Don't take the AP classes that are available at your high school, or don't take the AP tests before you take the class itself, right? So in the grand scheme of things, colleges prioritize AP courses way, way more than they do AP tests, right? It's not a direct substitute, right? So simply taking an AP test doesn't mean you've effectively gotten the equivalent of an AP course, right? It's a poor substitute, right? So they also would wonder why, if you took an AP test already, that you would be taking the course afterwards, right? So highly suggest you first take advantage of the things within your school. Generally speaking, you might want to take you can self-study for an AP test if, let's say, for example, it's already something that's within your knowledge set, right? like you've been playing piano for many years and you want to take AP music theory because you don't think you have enough time to put in your schedule, that might be worthwhile. Or taking AP English language if your school doesn't have AP English language but has a fairly rigorous honors AP or honors English class, for instance, right? So those would be situations where it'd be worthwhile, but I don't normally recommend self-studying anyway in most circumstances, just because if you're going to spend the time to do that, you might as well take an outside college class or a college level course, okay? Next is lots of students apply College of Letters in Science. I'm assuming we're talking about Berkeley here for the chance to study CS in sophomore year when they're able to declare their major. Would you recommend this approach or directly apply to CS major in College of Engineering, which can be more competitive? Yeah, that's always a decision that our students face every single year. Do you go with a lower acceptance rate of the College of Engineering, but knowing that you're guaranteed that major, or do you want to go for the College of Letters and Science and then declare for computer science later on, even if it's not guaranteed, right? Just because you do have to have like a minimum requirement for those courses. And these days, you know, with computer science getting more popular, I think colleges will have more and more restrictions. So I would say it just depends, right? If you're happy majoring in something else other than CS just to get into Berkeley, then you may want to take advantage of the higher acceptance rate of the College of Letters and Science. But if you would only really study at Berkeley if you got computer science, then you may want to just take the risk earlier on and go for engineering, knowing that you're at least guaranteed that major. It just really depends on your situation and what else is going on with your other colleges. Next, what should an 8th grader do this summer? Academic preview, famous colleges summer program. I would say if they have 2 AP classes, that's your answer right there, right? They should probably do some sort of preview classes to prepare themselves for those AP classes, just because that's a big jump in terms of like difficulty from like 8th grade. Okay, so I would say that probably would be the smartest thing that they would want to do the summer before, depending on the nature of the AP classes. I mean, it doesn't have to be only that, right? You can do other things related to your extracurriculars as well. And yeah, I mean, before high school gets hectic, if you as a family want to maybe do like a week or two in the summer and just go on vacation somewhere, it's probably the best time to do it. Right. So these are not mutually exclusive activities, right? So if you can find time to do a little bit of everything there, but probably not the famous colleges summer schools. There'll be plenty of time to do pre-college stuff later on. Next is our UIUC CS plus X majors. For those of you who don't know, that's, you know, CS plus economics, CS plus, I don't know, like statistics or something like that. Easier to be admitted to than pure CS? Yes. Yes. Pure CS at UIUC is like a 6.7% last I checked. And the CS plus X majors are like 20 something percent, like 24, 25%. Okay. And the reason for that is that you can't automatically just change to CS. UIUC has made it very, very difficult. If you didn't get into their CS program outright, the pure CS major, it's almost impossible, right? Might even be purely impossible now, right? So the CS plus X major is a blended curriculum with other things, right? So that's the compromise there. All right, next is I'd like to know how many AP courses students can choose in 11th grade. I mean, it'll depend very much depending on the high school, right? So the follow-up to that is, does student have to choose physics honors in 11th grade or physics honors optional for year 12th grade? It depends if you're going for engineering or physics as a major. The earlier you can take that course, the better, I would say. Okay. And in terms of the number of APs, it'll vary based on what the student can handle. But in my experience, if let's say, for example, you're in California, especially like Northern California, a lot of the high schools there, 11th grade, it's not uncommon for very, very competitive students who are aiming for top schools to have like 4, 5, or even 6 APs or honors classes in the mix. Okay. Next is my school's mid-year transcript or senior year is not yet available. Is it too late for colleges to consider? Oh, no, that's part of the process. You know, that's definitely something that they would send when it's time. They know your schools, right? It's not like they haven't accepted anybody from your school before. So at this stage, many colleges are probably just reaching final committee meetings. Many schools will not actually send out their decisions until like mid to late March, right? So if it's not going to be ready for another like week or two, I mean, your school's gonna, you know, send those out eventually. It's not like they haven't done this before. So don't worry too much. Okay. Okay, oof, it keeps going here. I'll probably have time for maybe 3 or 4 here. Okay, next is my son wants to compete in both speech and debate and science Olympiad in school. Both these two clubs have the same meeting time. So he picked speech and debate and got many awards. But if he applies for STEM major, will that have a negative impact? He does use a good robotics outside. No, not really. I think Science Olympiad can be a good activity, but it's not. I would say it's not as impactful as it used to be in previous years, right? I would say if he's doing pretty well for speech and debate, he made the right choice, especially if he's getting many awards. Okay, there are other ways to get evidence for your major. I think the summer would be a good opportunity. Science Olympiad is not a necessity if you're going to be a STEM major, especially if you have other activities like USACO and robotics anyway. So I think you should be fine. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you speak a little bit more slowly? Okay, yeah, so I'm trying to get to as many of them as I can, but I guess it's more important that you get the answers to these questions. All right, next is we heard from private schools that are trying to do away with AP classes, probably for equity. What do you do? Well, I mean, that's where you can look outside of your school. Okay, so taking college level courses outside of your school could be a good way to supplement that if your school decides to sort of not have as many AP classes available. Okay. Next is what kinds of students get into the BSMD programs? Oof, that's really rough because most BSMD programs have like maybe like a 2% acceptance rate. So I would say probably a strong track record and passion for medicine, not just science research, but medicine, right? So, you know, doing things medically oriented, like having, things like hospital internships. But of course, high level science ability is also pretty important for these. And of course, just activities that show a predisposition towards medicine. I would say volunteering is also pretty important just because they want to see that the student has like genuine compassion for other people. Okay, yeah, let's just finish up the last two here, might as well. Do you think that a paid summer camp like Brown has science summer school will help for applying college or actually no need to? I would say that if you're paying for a summer program, don't think that it'll help get you into just that college by virtue of association. So what I mean is that if you're going to pay for a summer program at Brown, it's not necessarily like you will get a better chance at Brown just because you're doing the summer program of Brown. Okay, so it might help in the sense that you're doing something that maybe counts for college credits and it's more rigorous that way. I think that would probably be something that would help in terms of that part of the application. Okay. What classes would you suggest for a business pathway kid? Well, I mean, there are business classes either at your school or even outside of your school that you can take. Econ and higher level math classes would all be good. Statistics, I would say, would be good as well. And then Jason, lastly, are there any bio or medical camps? There's a lot. I'm sorry, I can't really go through as many of those as possible. If you contact one of our offices, if you want to schedule an initial consultation, they could probably go ahead and set you up with someone who can give you some like information about those. Okay. All right, that was a lot to get through. Sorry about the pace. I will try to slow down next week, I promise. All right, so
Okay,
okay, great. Have a wonderful
thank
weekend,
you.
everybody.